So, Berto, some people have been sending in some short questions for you and me to answer. What do you say we read those questions and answer them?
Sounds scary to me.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I manufacture see-through mirrors.
So this first question is from Magdalena from the Czech Republic. She writes, What kind of information you wouldn't tell your therapist? So what kind of information would you not tell your therapist? Berto, what do you think?
Well, I can't tell you. I mean, come on. All right, let's see. If I'm breaking my own thing, well, let's see. If I were, picture myself in my therapy session, I'm talking about my life. Maybe there are some mental thoughts that I wouldn't spell out because, your brain says a lot of things. And some of those things, it's not like you're controlling them in real time. For example, you might see a person walk alongside of you on the street, and for a second, your brain might present a sentence like, "Oh, I just would love to smack the back of his head."
Oh, I see. So,
but you don't really mean to or have any intention of doing this. It wasn't even really you. It's just something that presented itself in your consciousness, right?
Well, would you tell your therapist that? Like, by the way, I have some random...
Oh, maybe if it was recurring, but like, let's say I'm in the actual session, and in the middle of the session, let's say it's a female therapist, right? I'm in the middle of the session, and for a second, I noticed that her breasts look especially prominent today. I'm not going to say, hey, by the way, I think your breasts look prominent today, even though I thought it, right?
Okay.
That's an example.
What other kinds of things?
Now, that's kind of more on the moment, right? Now, maybe an example of something that would be more like a long-term thing that I wouldn't bring up. I think if it was, well, actually, would I, Humberto Castañeda, have any barriers? I don't know. I mean, I told my therapist a lot of things that I hadn't told anyone before. Would I have told her? I suppose if I had done something I was really, really embarrassed about.
Right, like what kind of things?
But I told her really embarrassing things.
Yeah. I don't imagine you being imagine you being the sort of person that would hold back. Because you've talked about some pretty embarrassing things on this podcast.
Yeah.
So I would imagine
That's true, right?
You wouldn't be too shy to
and
tell.
that's in public.
Yeah.
But I'm sure I did hold back narratively in the moment. Like, maybe I was telling her about something that I did, and yet I made it sound slightly not as bad in my favor.
Okay. But like, what about like masturbatory practices or something? Like, what if she was like, so, let's get into your sexual life.
Right. With that therapist. Okay, here's the big irony. The only kind of therapist that I can imagine getting into detailed conversations about my masturbatory or sexual practices is the kind of therapist that I would find hot, and therefore we would end up having very unethical situations happening. So I would rather that not come up. So no, I would, you're right. That is something that never came up, and I probably wouldn't have brought it up unless it happened to be like an issue, like, hey, I'm having erectile dysfunction, or every time I go to have sex, my head explodes, or something like this, right?
Yeah.
But if it was more like, oh, okay, well, let me tell you about my sex life.
I'm pretty sure when you have sex, your head is supposed to explode.
Right, but if it's more like, oh man, you should know, like every time I have sex, I spread some vanilla ice cream on the person's tummy, and then I make sure my ass cheeks touch it first. Like, I'm not gonna talk about that in the privacy of a session.
Okay.
On the podcast, yes.
Right. Yeah, well, so listeners, what do you think? What kind of information do you not tell your therapist? Email me at contact@psychologyinseattle.com, or comment on this, or go to the fan page. I think it's an interesting question, and I'll just say, as a therapist, it's totally normal to not want to reveal certain things to your therapist. It's a bit of a myth that you're supposed to be like 1,000,000,000% honest with your therapist in order for therapy to go well. It's just not true. Another question here from famous patron Lyndon.
FPL!
He writes, this is a question just for you, he said.
Ooh.
How has the sum total of everything you've learned on the podcast influenced you at work or with people?
0%. No, just kidding. Actually, let's see. I think through the various years of doing this, I certainly have increased my improv stat. In all my little stats.
Okay.
I think I probably started off as a 7, maybe. I was pretty high already, but probably a 7. I think now I'm like at a 9. I could improv my way out of a tunnel.
Yeah, I think I'm better too, actually, too, yeah.
So I think that's helped. I also think it is personally...
Does that help at work and with people, though?
Oh, I got to be a little careful because depending on the context, who I'm with, some people don't like constant randomness, right? But if I'm in a creative environment where I'm trying to be creative, it really helps me because it immediately makes it safer to start ideating.
Well, and if you are saying improv in the way that I am, I imagine it would help in that instead of you just being in your own head, you're bouncing off what other people are saying.
Sure, that's a fair point.
You're yes-anding. You're not just It's not just you throwing shit out.
Absolutely,
it's you throwing stuff out in response to what other people are saying. That sort of elevates the movement. Absolutely,
and yes, you're right. That definitely has had an effect. What I would say, I always have to be a little careful about because of the nature of my work. We do these see-through mirrors, and there's a lot of meetings in conference rooms. Trying to talk about all the different metrics about how many mirrors to build and all these things, right?
So do you ever do focus groups about the see-through mirrors while the clients are behind a see-through mirror?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're see-through both ways. So we're sitting there and we're like...
I think they call that a window.
I don't... But so we're like planning the next quarter. And actually, windows are one of our main competitors, but I don't know why. And then we're sitting there and I need to be careful because if I start going into podcast Berto mode, it can be a little dominating, right? It can be a little overwhelming because on the podcast, I dial myself up a little bit. So we keep the conversation moving. So there's no boring spots. So
and it's just you and me.
And it's me and you. And we got outrageous commentary, right?
Well, and you're not like in a meeting of 12 people.
Exactly. And so there I will use the skills like you just said, like, that's a great point, Mary. And we should also have smaller mirrors,
What about other kinds of things, like the content of, learning about yourself?
Yeah, well, for one thing, so about myself, I have extended my therapy that I had by being on the podcast because I've talked about topics, many of which I had already brought up in my therapy, some which I hadn't. I remember there's a few things that I've outed in the podcast, but that's also helped me go further with my own understanding of those aspects of myself. There's also been specific topics in which I've learned and changed my mind. One of the notable ones was the suicide episode, where I came into the episode with my traditional stance about like, that's unacceptable, inexcusable, you're a bad person for committing suicide. And then I kind of, my eyes were open, and I had a new understanding about that whole universe, right? Also things like, through our discussions about things like evolutionary psychology, as much crap as I give you, I've definitely evolved my understanding of, what do we mean when we say something is provable or not provable, these kinds of things. Similarly with our conversations around, topics you've brought up that I knew little about, that then I had a deeper understanding just from hearing you explain it. So that's also been great. And I think some of the guests have been really helpful for me to expand my horizons as well. A couple examples come to mind. When we did the sex positive stuff back in the day, it was a world I was sort of unaware of.
Yeah, me too.
And I had a really close-minded view of that whole thing. And then I was like, whoa. We've also had, like, for example, the atoms, Adam atoms, right? That I would have never thought, oh yeah, you can use D&D for like therapy. Like that was pretty eye-opening. So I think the guests have also been really interesting over the years. And lastly, I've learned just how wrong you are about so many things.
Yeah, I am. All right, here's another short question from Steven. He writes, before going back to school, I worked as a field instructor for a wilderness therapy organization. Students would journal about their past and where they wanted to go. and we regularly created rituals for students' achievements. The work, while hellish at times, deepened my curiosity towards both therapy and the impact of sharing one's perceived story. A question for you two. Have either of you had an outdoor experience, positive or negative, that has continued to impact you today? Berto.
An outdoor experience. Wow, that's a great question.
Because in Colombia, you lived like right in the middle of the city.
Yeah.
There was no wilderness.
No, not really.
Yeah.
The wilderness experiences I had as a child were because I would go visit an uncle who lived in a different city that was a lot more outdoors. I also remembered a field trip we had so you've heard of the legend of El Dorado, I'm sure, right? Well, one of the places that was thought to be, still thought by many to be the place that the legend originated in, is right there near Bogota. It's called Lake Guatavita. And it's a lake that's super, super deep. And they used to float out the chipchas in their what do you call it? In their ornaments, all their gold ornaments on golden.
Right. Well, let me explain this.
Yeah.
So when we were in Bogota, we went to the Gold Museum, which is perhaps the biggest museum, culturally speaking, in all of Colombia, maybe.
Probably.
Yeah, it's a massive museum.
Yeah.
It takes a long time to walk through. And it was fascinating because it really, it talks about Colombian or, that region, its history from a Colombian perspective. It's not from the perspective of Americans or Europeans. And it talks about it in such a way where it's like, as I'm reading the timeline, I'm like, man, because intellectually I know about the civilizations that existed in the Americas prior to white people coming and spreading their germs and also warfare to kill everybody, genocide through accidental germ exposure to smallpox and other things, and also literal genocide, purposeful genocide. I've intellectually known about these civilizations, but in this museum, you see the artifacts and you see the evidence of this rich, interesting civilization. Also, when it's portrayed, it's like apocalypto, right? Where it's portrayed in this really savage, violent, homicidal sacrifices and stuff. And it's like, yeah, there was some of that going on, but the vast majority of the population just lived regular lives, and they had, technology and aqueducts and gold. And one of the but getting back to some of the violence, one of the known rituals that they had back then in Colombia was it the Incas? Is that the...
No, this was the tribes that were there were the Muiscas.
Okay.
Muiscas.
And it would have been 1,000 years ago or something? 2,000 years ago?
Well, even this stuff was still happening 600 years ago.
Okay. And the civilization, as a part of their sacrifice to the gods, they would get a big raft, a ceremonial raft, and they would put people on the raft. I think they might even tie them up, young, like virgins and stuff. And then they would put all these different ornaments and everything, and they sort of put it out in the middle of this lake, and then it would sink very slowly.
Right. And it had tons of gold on it too, so that would make it heavy.
Right. And it was supposedly this transcendent ceremony that was supposed to elevate the civilization and the people being sacrificed.
That's right.
And the virgins or the young people, it was usually young virgins, right?
Probably.
I can't remember, but
the most helpless part of the society, probably.
Right. And they were slowly dragged under the water and drowned.
Right.
And it was and the most prized possession in the entire museum is a gold representation of someone who sculpted a gold representation of this ceremony, of this raft. And we still have that. It's very delicate and,
it's amazing how intricately designed it is. I mean, it was made back then.
Right.
About their ceremony.
Right.
In gold, and it's so beautiful. Now, the ceremony is horrible, but the thing is...
While we're on the topic, Berto, let's talk about your ancestry results.
Oh, right. I had already done the 23andMe years ago, maybe 5 years ago or something. And when I did it, it came back sort of anticlimactic. It was an anticlimactic thing because I got it back and it was really low granularity. It was back when they basically said, you are a human. Turns out you're a human. And then my genealogy said...
You're 99% human.
Yeah. And it said like, okay, I think it was something like 94 or 97% Iberian, which means the Iberian Peninsula where Spain is and stuff. And then the other percentage, it said other. So at the time I thought, what?
Well, so that was mind-blowing to you because you thought in the family lore was that, sure, part of your ancestry
came from Spain,
comes from Spain, but some sizable percentage is from native Colombian people.
Yeah, certainly my ancestors raped a few virgins, right? Like, I mean, that must have happened. I mean, like, I'm not proud of the horrors that must have befallen the natives.
Right, and so that's why that's why you were so disappointed. You're saying anticlimactic, but I would say you were disappointed because you, according to this test, were 100% colonial rapist.
Well, actually, maybe not, because maybe actually I was interpreting it the wrong way, because that would have meant that they didn't actually have sex. Well,
you're a colonialist who raped and didn't have any kids.
Yeah,
you're from a line of people.
Maybe they just murdered. Yeah.
Well, they also could have raped, and there could be other people.
Right.
But the point is that it's a shameful. You know, it's like whenever you do ancestry, if you're a white American, like I'm half white American, it's all fraught with difficulty because I have ancestors who owned slaves.
Right.
And or were supportive of slaves. Most of my ancestry is from the North, so like, and even those that were in the South, they were Quakers who were actually anti-slavery and a lot of things like that, and would actually help slaves escape. But yeah, so it's a bit of you were bummed out, but then you got an update.
Right, did get an update. Oh, and by the way, not only was I bummed out, like, oh man, all my ancestors are colonial. Okay, but I also was surprised because I'm not the whitest person, right? Like my skin is not like super dark, but it's got color, right? So I was fairly certain I must have some native in me, right? Some amount of native.
But there's pretty dark Iberian people.
I guess you're right. And so, and it turns out, yes, because
I mean, as dark as you anyway.
Yeah, that's true. So I got my results, my updated results, because 23andMe keeps refining their data. And I logged in because I think you had mentioned like, oh, you should go back and check it. So I did. And it is quite different. So I am still something like 75% European. Out of that 75%, like 40% Iberian. And then a whole bunch of subsets of Italian, Southern European, Eastern European, like a little bits and pockets of stuff. And then the other 35% or whatever, a lot of it is native. It's like 20%.
Do they designate as just all the Americas or Colombia?
No, actually 20% is, it says Mexico/Colombian natives.
Mexico/Colombia.
Yeah, I don't know why they do it that way. That might be a part they're still refining.
That doesn't make any sense because there's all the countries.
I know, but they said Mexico/Colombian natives. But that's as opposed to like
maybe they mean North Central America.
They might have, but Colombia. It literally says Mexico/Colombia. So okay, fine. So 20% is Native American from at least Colombia. Maybe a little bit of Central America.
All right, well, there you go.
So I am native. I mean, not
you're still mostly colonial.
Still mostly colonial. And then there's other pieces. I'm also Asian, brother. We're Asian brothers. I have some Asian in me.
How does that work?
Well, because basically every native has Asian.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right. So getting back to that story, you would go to that lake.
So I would go to that. No, we went once. I remember the field trip. It was a school field trip. And it was such a moving experience because the lake is not much to look at from one perspective. Like you go there, it's like, I remember there's this opening between the hills and you kind of drive through that opening. And then there's this lake and it was foggy and the lake is sort of like muddy.
What's it spelled so people can...
Guatavita, Guatavita, Guatavita. And so you go through this opening and then you see the lake. And again, it's kind of misty and foggy. The waters are not clear at all. And it's very muddy around. So it's not like this glorious, oh my God, it's the legend of El Dorado, right? But at the same time, it's like, oh my God, like this place has been around. I mean, obviously the place, but the history of people like 500, 600 years ago would have been there doing these ceremonies, and that probably at the bottom there's still a shit ton more of gold, right? That was kind of mind-blowing. So I remember that. And I don't know how old I was, but I think I was maybe in 6th grade.
Have they dredged up gold?
Oh, yeah. Oh. Yeah. It's just that it's, like I said, it's very murky, very deep waters. And so I don't know. Anyways, that was one of the experiences. Did it leave a lasting feeling? It was, I think, the first time I felt a sense of, oh, history has happened before me.
Interesting.
You know, because, you know, when you're a kid, you're here, there's your family. You don't even wonder, like, what, did my grandpa have a dad? Like, you just like, okay, there's my family. And then you don't really sit there and, I mean, in school, they force feed you some history, but you don't like absorb it.
Yeah, I guess I had a similar experience growing up in that so I grew up in the woods. I grew up in basically wilderness. My house, for example, growing up, you could kind of see one house, maybe two houses from our house, but it was, so we were completely surrounded by trees, and my backyard was just this huge forest, not huge, but like dense, I should say, that no parents ever went into. And so we always played in there. And then like a block away, there was this humongous forest and lakes and like bike trails and, you know, old cars that had been shot up with shotguns and stuff. You know, people would just drive out an old car and shoot it up and stuff.
I'm picturing Deliverance.
Yeah, kind of. So this is Sammamish Plateau back in the day. And along those lines, while I'd be digging up in the backyard, I would find an old railroad spike or something.
Wow. And
it would be all rusty and stuff. And you just think like, wow, there's like a railroad going through here at some, or a mining situation. But yeah, so I have, in contrast to you, Berto, you know, this question posed to me is like, well, what childhood experience did I not have that didn't involve the wilderness, you know?
Right.
I've never been a camper or a hiker or anything like that, but as a kid, it was basically like, you know, if I got home from school or it was a summer day, I just bolted out the door.
The default was outside.
In the woods.
Wow.
Well, because like we didn't really have a lawn, you know what I mean? Like it was just like trees right there, you know? And my three best friends who two of them lived right next door to me on one side, and one of them lived right next door to me on the other side.
Yeah.
So it was like ding, ding, ding houses with trees all around. And then the neighborhood was all trees in between all the houses. You know, it was just like, and imagine you're 7 years old and you don't like being around your parents because they get in your way. Right. And it's the 70s where parents don't really want you around anyway. Like the woods were just like,
perfect.
Our private playground.
Right.
That we knew that parents wouldn't enter the woods because they didn't want to get their shoes dirty.
It's so funny, right? Like,
yeah.
What happens to us adults? We're like, I don't want to go in there.
Right. They're just like, oh, there's spider webs. There's mud puddles. There's pine cones.
It's dangerous for us adults, but kids.
Right. And so we would just enter it and know that no one would ever come in. And that was proven time and time again for years. And there were other, you know, friends in the neighborhood too.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So, you know, I even have recurring dreams that take place in the woods that I grew up. Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, yeah, because you're right. My memories are mostly indoors.
Yeah.
I have memories of playing outdoors with my cousins and things, but not where I lived. I guess I remember when I started to learn how to ride the bike, or at Christmas when we'd all go outside and in the middle of the street light a big bonfire in the street, right?
Right. And the street in Bogota that you lived in is like downtown Manhattan.
It's a car's street, yes. Yeah. It's like, but most of my memories are inside my grandma's house, like running around, and even when my cousins would come over, we'd be inside playing and everything.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly have memories like that too, but
that's the default for me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, we would climb trees, we'd build forts, we'd have pine cone fights, we'd dig holes, we'd play war, we'd ride bikes, we'd hide from cars, and we'd do pranks on people and stuff, and then run into the woods because we knew every trail and every rock and every root and every tree, and It was just, it was like our big playground.
And that's the other thing. You had friends right there.
Yeah.
So that was the other thing that I was missing is I literally had zero friends in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Not one, not Paul, 3 blocks down. No, zero.
Yeah. And I'm just talking about the friends who live right next to me.
Right.
Like if I extend out like 1 or 2 blocks, then you got to include like 15 other.
Right.
Other
So that
friends.
was what it was like at my cousin Adriana's. When I would go there, I loved it because there was a little community there and I'd have all my friends there and stuff. But where I lived, zero.
Yeah. So the impact on me today, I could really talk about many things, but the one thing that popped into my mind was back then we would get involved in a lot of projects, me and my friends. It'd be like June or something, and the 4 of us would be doing something. And we'd be like, "Oh man," because we did activities together. Like, okay, we're all gonna get big wheels and we're gonna ride it like this, or we're all gonna get our bikes and we're gonna ride to the store and buy something. We played a prank on this girl by acting like she had a secret admirer, so we all did that together. We listened to music together. It was like we just did things as a collective. You know. And we would, for example, in the woods, we'd say, because it was this massive playground, we're like, okay, we have the whole summer. Let's build the most epic fort of all time, And one of the guys, the 2 brothers who lived next door, their dad was a contractor and had like tools and.
Oh my gosh! So like a real fort.
Yeah, and so let's build a real fort in the trees, or let's build a real clubhouse. Got to build a foundation, and got to dig the hole, and we'd spend a lot of time on it. Most of the projects we would peter out on. Like one of our foundations that we dug ended up just being a urination hole. You know what I mean? But
well, that's useful.
Yeah,
you don't have to go back home.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, we never went back home, man. We went pee. And actually, the younger brother, so all of us would pee, right? We just whip it out and pee, but he would put his pants and his underwear all the way down to his ankles when he would pee.
Wouldn't he get pee on the pants or something?
No, but we always laughed at him, but he couldn't pee unless he had, and we just anyway it was.
That's funny.
But yeah, so
but he'd pee standing up.
Yeah, we all peed standing up, and most of us would just pull our pants down enough to pee, but he would put his pants all the way down to the ground.
That's funny. Okay.
Yeah, and we would just endlessly make fun of him for it. But, I fell out of trees. I, injured myself in various different ways in the woods. But so as a collective, we would make these proclamations and these projects, and they were very important to us. Okay, let's amass a bunch of pine cones, and then, over the next couple of weeks, and then we'll have the most epic pine cone fight of all time. Or we would build a bike trail, or I would construct these really elaborate stories of war, like we were the good guys and we were fighting the Nazis or something. And there would be like multiple chapters of this story that would exist over different days and stuff.
You were LARPing and you were the DM.
Yeah, essentially. And so how that, I wonder if that was a template of enjoyment or of life that, perpetuated into my adult life, in which I like to do projects with friends. Like this podcast.
Right.
Most podcasts, especially in psychology, the clinician does it by themselves. And they don't do it with other people in general. And so, but that did not appeal to me at all. I was like, I gotta have friends.
You're conditioned for that.
Yeah. When, being in bands,
right?
Like that's like I've tried to do solo stuff and I've never liked it. I love working with a collective, with, or our live shows that we've done or something, or the program at Antioch, my education program, it's doing it with a team. I wonder if that, woods experience sort of affected me today. Yeah. But also specifically to woods, when I go to a woods, landscape in the Pacific Northwest, it is extremely calming and enriching to me. Just that the smell of mud, the smell of, pine trees.
It must feel like home to you.
It is totally, yeah.
Huh. And
there's a certain smell that I like alder trees and moist air, like the woods in in the Pacific Northwest are almost always moist. They're almost always
that's true.
they're like when you think of a California Yosemite forest or a forest in, I don't know, Southern Cal or something, it's dry,
right?
But in Pacific Northwest, it's always some degree of moisture.
Yeah, it's not a rainforest, but it's moist.
Yeah. I mean, it's close to a rainforest, Anyway. All right. Well, send in yours, people. Contact at psychologyinseattle.com. Let's take a break. And when we get back, I have an important announcement to make.
What?
All right. We're back from the break. Berto, I have an announcement to make.
Dun, dun, dun.
So we have donated thousands of dollars, as many of you know, to important causes, like to organizations that give homes and services to homeless people, like Plymouth Housing Group, Camp 10 Trees, which is a camp for queer youth, Pet Finder, which saves pets from being euthanized, the Trevor Project, which helps queer youth avoid suicide, the Special Olympics, and other causes that we've given to over the years. When we started the Patreon thing 3 years ago, a listener actually said, you should donate part of your profits to charities. And I was like, oh, what a wonderful idea. And so we've been doing that ever since. We've donated thousands of dollars, as I said. And
I got busy creating fake charities so you would donate to them.
Yeah. And I spent time making sure that didn't happen. Well, all these things some of these things have been based on meeting our goals on Patreon. Well, we met our next goal on Patreon.
What?
Of getting 900 patrons.
900? Is that over 9,000?
So now we get to start so I set a while back, I don't know, a year ago or something. Mm-hmm. If we get 900 patrons, then we will start our drum roll scholarship program.
Scholarships. That's right. I remember you saying that.
So our next move is we're going to give $2,000 to a worthy student who is a student in mental health. So
that's crazy.
If you're a student in mental health, apply. Or if you're going to be a student soon, apply. Or if you know a student in mental health, tell them to apply. The applicant does not have to be a patron or a listener to the podcast.
Can they be a host?
They could be a host. The applicant has to prove that they are indeed a student in mental health, so be prepared to do that. Also, you must have at least 12 months left in your program. If you only have like 3 months left.
Right. Because
it'll take us a while to even process these. And so you have to have at least a year left in your program.
And what's the criteria?
So email us an essay. It's contact@psychologyinseattle.com in a Word document, preferably. 5-page maximum, because I don't want to read, because it'll just be me and a few other people reading these things. Explain why you think you're a good candidate for the scholarship. Know that I won't be publishing these essays. It will only be me and a few other people that will read them. So know that you can say personal things and not have it be read on the podcast or anything like that. So again, explain why you think you're a good candidate for the scholarship and provide 3 references, people who can comment on the content of your essay. So, because I'll call them and I'll say, so they said this, can you tell me more? And so I want people who can comment on that. And it, potentially could be family members or something, but it'd be preferred if it wasn't. The criteria are the quality of the essay will be considered, and then these 3 elements. So past, present, future. So in the past, I want to see a demonstrated commitment to making the world a better place. So obviously, you can include things like I did a mission in Mexico or something.
Right.
But it could also just be things that are more under the radar, like I have been trying to help people at my school or something. It doesn't have to be a massive volunteer program like the Peace Corps or something. It could be lots of different things. So a demonstrated commitment to making the world a better place, not just an intent, but you've actually done things. The present that I want to see is a demonstrated need for money. So, I don't want some upper class person applying to this. I need someone who needs the money, right?
Right.
if, say, just as an example, you are a single mother who has 3 kids and you're 40 years old and you're going back to school and
you don't qualify
and you can't continue working at your job, and you're having trouble even paying your bills.
Right.
Okay, that's an example of present need. Now, this one's a little more flexible because some people have varying levels of need there, and so
right.
Like
it could be, it's okay if you have a trust fund and if you're lying on the application, but maybe you want the money really badly.
Yeah, you want a new car or something. And the future elements I'm looking for are goals for your career. So, and I will be evaluating how worthy those goals are. So, example, if you're the sort of person that is like, I've done a lot of things for the world and I have a great need for money, but I pretty much am a believer in capitalism and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and so I don't really care about human beings, and I'm only gonna serve the rich and all that kind of stuff.
That sounds like a great essay.
Yeah, yeah. Then
they get points for honesty,
right? So, but the main thing here is, what have you done to make the world a better place, and what are you gonna do to make the world a better place? And it really can be quite broad. It doesn't have to be, Harvard essay-esque. It doesn't have to be like, again, it doesn't have to be missions to, Bolivia or something. It can be quite broad, is my point. You could be creating art that inspires people or something. Right. It doesn't really matter to me in terms of the content. It's more about the spirit behind it. So submit your essays, again, 5-page maximum, to contact@psychologyandstato.com by midnight, December 31st, 2018. So that gives you about a month
coming right up
to submit that. This episode might actually come out in December. So,
we should, my best advice is to wait to the last minute to write the essay.
Yeah. Maybe I should actually extend this. I'm gonna extend it to January 31st, 2019.
Wow.
Yeah. So January 31st, 2019.
It's really generous.
That will be the extent, because I think this episode might come out actually in late December.
Oh,
yeah.
So, in 2 days, you better write your essay.
So what do you think, Berto?
That's an amazing opportunity. I think that's great.
So I think it'll be really gratifying for me and us, I assume, to be able to hand over a check.
Absolutely.
For $2,000 to help someone get through school.
And just to think like that one little leg up might be enough to get them to the next step and the next step, and they might really change the world, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's amazing.
All right, so let's do some let's do a gripe or wrath. I have one.
Gripes of wrath.
Okay. So this makes me really upset.
Wait, sorry. We need like an intro to every section. So.
Okay.
The gripes of wrath or something like that.
I like it. So this really makes me upset. You have Buddy Rich, the drummer, right?
Yeah.
You have Buddy Guy, the guitarist.
Ding, 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 ding.
You have Guy Ritchie, the director of Snatch, Sherlock Holmes, and King Arthur. And you have Ricky Bobby from Talladega Nights. There's too much overlap there.
The last one is fairly different, but you're right about the first three. So is this like, does this? I
mean, because Ricky Bobby is like, you could say Rick, Richard, Bobby, right? So you got Buddy Rich and Buddy Guy, and then Guy Ritchie.
It's like, oh, you love that drummer Ricky Bobby. So do you find this like? Do you make errors where you confuse these in conversation, or?
Well, that's where it comes up. The other day, I was getting Buddy Rich and Buddy Guy mixed up in my mind.
Wow.
And then I was like, wait, there's a Guy Ritchie. Who's that? So I had to Google all of them. And of course,
what about Richie Rich?
Richie Rich.
Do you know that guitarist drummer guy, Richie Rich?
Yeah. Do you have any gripes?
Oh my gosh, gripes of wrath. Oh yes. Okay. I have a. This has been building. It's the Rotten Tomatoes discrepancy gripe. So you go to check Rotten Tomatoes to see if a movie is getting good reviews or bad reviews, and I'm sure you've noticed there's this divide between the reviewer score and the audience score. And some movies are really, really divided, right? And so, take an example. What was one of the DC movies, right? They had or I forget which one it was, but there was a movie that came out that had like a 10% critic score and like a 70% audience score, right? That is a huge gap.
Well, as we've talked about before,
These reviewers are...
well, one, so we tend to look at these numbers as representation of two things. One is the overall quality of a movie,
right?
And two, how much the percentage likelihood that I'm going to like it, or the amount of which I'm going to like this movie. So if this movie got a 60% on Rotten Tomatoes, that means that about 60% of the world will like this movie,
right?
And I'm going to like this movie. I'm going to rate it about a 6 out of 10. Or when they see the audience score, they think the same thing. When all you got to do is look, just slightly at the methodology of these numbers and realize that's silly, because the Rotten Tomatoes thing, is fraught with all sorts of issues, because they read the reviews and because sometimes the quote unquote positive reviews, when you read the review, it's like, it's not really positive, because some reviewers will just be like, yeah, it was meh. And they'll be like, they'll code that as a positive review.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's one thing. The other thing is the sort of people who, as an employee, as a profession, become a movie critic, that is a very particular sort of person.
Right.
They're the sort of people that watch a shit ton of movies, right?
They aren't quite opinionated.
And they're probably not, your everyday people,
right?
So they're probably highly educated. They're probably white, by the way. You know what I mean? They're probably male. So there's just a lot of, self-selecting things that make the movie critic not representative of the population. Then you go to the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. Again, the assumption is, that's regular people. No. The sort of person who has an account on Rotten Tomatoes is a very particular sort of person. We're probably talking about people who are between the ages of 15 and 26 or something. People in general, a younger crowd, let's just say.
Yeah.
Probably mostly white people, probably mostly men.
Right.
Because how many women are like, I can't wait to log into Rotten Tomatoes? It's mostly young people who are highly opinionated about movies, really into movies, right? Again, this isn't just a general population of people.
Right. So, but, and you're totally right, and we've definitely discussed that before. I guess here's my issue, and I've come to a realization. I've had this debate for my entire life about, is a piece of art good because a lot of people like it, or is it good for more, other subjective qualities, or is it good for some very specific objective qualities, whether someone likes it or not, right? And this is the eternal debate. But I realized we can circumvent this debate. If you are a reviewer, it should be your job to tell me the likelihood I'm going to like it, but with one little caveat. If I like that genre or style. So, for example, here's the...
Right. Well, so I'll give an example.
Yeah.
So I have been tricked many times into going to a horror movie. Mm-hmm. Not many times, but a few times. Because, what was the recent horror movie that got really great reviews?
Hereditary?
Yeah, Hereditary.
Yeah.
People are like, oh my God, you got to see it. And you even said, and they're like, it's not really that. It's not like other horror movies. It is fucking like every horror movie. It is not like, it's not like Saw, but it's like, it's similar to The Ring, or maybe kind of like The Exorcist or something. It's not super gory,
right?
But it's definitely a horror movie, and it's just not appealing to me.
Sure.
This whole, because all these the central premise of these horror movies is there's a malevolent spirit that has supernatural powers that is terrorizing and then potentially harming a group of people.
Yeah, right.
And to me, that is not interesting to me, because you basically have a villain who is the malevolent spirit who can do anything they want.
Right.
But they hold back sometimes because they want to fuck with you for 80 minutes before they bring the hammer down at the end of the movie. It's like if I'm, if I'm up, so I'm trying to identify with the characters, and to me, if I was one of the characters, I'd just be like, well, I'm pretty sure there's a malevolent spirit that is fucking with me. I have no recourse. There's nothing I can do.
Right.
It's a malevolent spirit. It's beyond my control. It's basically a god, and it's targeting me. I'm done for unless the spirit just decides it doesn't want to.
But see, this is why I actually don't think movies like The Omen, Hereditary, maybe Rosemary's Baby, those are different from quote unquote standard horror movies. And the two key differences, in my opinion, one, the victim does realize they're sort of fucked, and they try to stop being sort of fucked. Unlike a lot of movies where they stay in the house and they try to make it work, and then the second part is they don't win. Whereas in most horror movies, there is a good guy wins.
Yeah,
a good person.
Okay,
wins.
so to you, that helps, and that helps me too.
Yeah,
but it's just not appealing. So to your point, when I see these high Rotten Tomato ratings, I now always have to remind myself, no, this is a horror movie.
Right.
So it's 90% in the horror genre.
That's right.
But if you don't like the horror genre, then you probably aren't going to like this movie.
And so take music, for example. Me and my friend Paul, Paul Maynard.
Yeah.
We have this little silly debate about the song "The Girl Is Mine." It's a song that I very much enjoyed as a kid, and
Paul and Michael.
Paul and Michael, that's right. And
the girl is mine.
Yeah, and it's a silly song, but some people think the world has had enough of silly love songs. But I like the song, right? And we have this eternal debate because he thinks it's the cheesiest thing known to man. And it is cheesy.
Yeah, big surprise.
Right. So we've had the debate about, but it was really popular, right? It was a really popular song.
I mean, he hates early Genesis. He hates the mid Genesis that I like.
It's too poppy, right?
Yeah.
So
he only likes 1973 Genesis.
That's right. So if he were a reviewer, he would be, in my opinion, not a useful reviewer for the average person. Because he would write a review of an album, a Billy Joel album, like, Glass House or something, and be like, this sucks. This is super cheesy. Never listen to this. Go drill holes in your skull before you listen to this. And most people would be like, oh, Jesus, I'm definitely staying away from that album. Turns out there's millions and millions of people that would have loved that album. So to me, a reviewer, it's okay to have opinions, but you got to couch your opinions in context so we know what the hell you're talking about. That way, if you say, listen, I hate these things, and now I'm going to give you my opinion so you know where I come from.
Yeah. I listen to a lot of podcasts where they review pop culture. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I've found is that the critics who rise to the top are critics who actually like a lot of things. Mm. Their preference is actually quite normal or mainstream.
Right.
Like they can love the Beatles and Taylor Swift.
Right.
Like I wouldn't be a good music reviewer because I would shit on everything like the Chainsmokers, even Taylor Swift for that matter. I mean, God bless, the songs are fine, but I just can't stop laughing at some of the choices of lyrics that some of these bands make, and the sort of personas they try to put forward. Like what's her face? God, I can't even remember her name, but anyway, Katy Perry. Some of the stuff is just like, come on, I don't know. It's so. But I wouldn't be a good music critic.
But if people were, let's say a radio station and a record company was using your opinion, they would go broke.
Right. Exactly, and I know that.
Right.
But I would be a good movie reviewer because I like a lot of mainstream movies. The Taylor Swift of movies I like.
I see.
Han Solo movies.
Sure.
Disney movies. Toy Story. Very pop mainstream stuff. I actually quite enjoy. So, so I find that the best critics that are paid attention to the most, I find them to actually be surprisingly enjoying of a lot of things of a broad base. And I think and I've often wondered this because a lot of reviewers are older. They're like our age or older.
Right.
And I've always been like, how can you like this shit? Like, there'll be a 45-year-old music critic who loves top 40 of today.
Yeah.
And I'm like, are you just convincing yourself because you have to keep your job, or do you genuinely like this shit? Like it's a question I have. It seems though that they like it. Anyway, so I want to talk a little bit about some of the TV shows and movies that I've been watching, just to kind of wrap this up. So I rewatched The Crow from 1994.
Oh, right.
What out of 10 would you give that?
Oh my God, I haven't seen it since 1994. So my view is probably skewed. I think I would probably have given it a 7.
Yeah, I gave it a 7.
Yeah.
I think back in the day I gave it much higher, but I sort of downgraded it a little bit because it's not the best movie.
No.
But the other thing is it's so 90s. Like it is dripping with 90s.
90s
angst. Like Stone Temple Pilots.
Yeah.
Get down.
And it's dark and rainy.
Dark and rainy, long hair. The women are wearing, dark lipstick with the chokers and the belly button showing and
long, greasy, wet hair.
Yeah. And of course, or not of course, but I think I've talked about this before, is Brandon Lee dies in this and he's half Chinese, half white. And when back then I had long hair and everyone would stop me and be like, "Oh my God,
I've seen the pictures, man.
You look just like Brandon Lee."
Yeah, Kirk is not kidding. I think if I hadn't seen the pictures and you said that, I'd be like, "Really?" Because I think you with short hair and the way you look now, I don't quite picture it. When you showed me that picture, you're a dead ringer.
Yeah.
He has a picture with the long hair. It looks like Brandon Lee. I'm like, oh my God, you could do the biopic. Except now, maybe not. But
it's not pronounced it's biopic.
Sorry, the biopsy is what I meant.
Directed by Alex Proyas, who went on to make Dark City, which is one of my favorite movies, which I also recently rewatched.
I haven't rewatched that.
I rewatch that movie once a year.
Really?
It is an awesome movie.
I want to rewatch it.
It totally holds up. It moves really fast.
Yeah.
It came out just a couple years before The Matrix did.
Dude, that blew my mind when I saw it.
Yeah.
Because I remember seeing the preview, and the preview, it showed the people floating with the nails along the wall and stuff, and I'm like, what is this?
It's so good.
Oh, man.
I finally saw The Hunt for the Wilder People, 2016.
Not heard that.
Sam Neill is in it. It's directed by Taika Waititi, who made Ragnarok. And have you seen Ragnarok, Thor Ragnarok?
Yeah, yeah.
And What We Do in the Shadows, have you seen that?
I've seen the show. Wasn't it a show first?
No.
No, they're making a show. That's what it is. They're making a TV show. I saw the movie, but
as a horror person and as a comedy guy, you got to see What We Do in the Shadows.
I watched it, but they're also making a TV show.
Oh, you did see it?
I did see it.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah.
He also did Flight of the Conchords and Eagle versus Shark, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, Eagle versus Shark. Hunter Wilder people talked about it. They're like, if you like Flight of the Conchords, you like Eagle versus Shark, you like What We Do in the Shadows, you like Thor Ragnarok, you like Taika Waititi, you have to see Hunt for Wilder People. I have to tell you, this movie was boring to me. I gave it a 7 though.
Really?
I probably should knock that down a little bit. It was the first half an hour. I was like, oh, this is cute. But then as time went on, I was just like, okay, this is getting a little bit of a slog, I rewatched Men at Work with Charlie Sheen and Emilio Estevez.
Oh, that was fun.
Yeah.
With their garbage people.
Yeah. Directed by Emilio Estevez, actually.
Wait, that was directed by him?
Yeah.
What?
And, at the time, Charlie Sheen was in his Platoon fame and Emilio Estevez.
So he had sort of like outshined his brother for a bit there.
Right.
Now, what happened to Emilio Estevez?
It's a good question because Charlie Sheen went on and did lots of things, but Emilio Estevez, he continued to act, but in very small things, but which is sort of weird because to my generation, he was one of the most famous people. Yeah. Breakfast Club, St. Elmo's Fire.
You know which movie I never watched?
What?
Young Guns.
He was in Young Guns 2.
Never watched either of those.
So the first 20 minutes of Men at Work is just hilarious. It's genius. It's like, it kind of reminds me of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Yep, totally.
but the last 45 minutes,
it's a little goofy.
it becomes basically like a heist movie,
Yeah.
comedy action movie. And
Isn't there a scene in a car with the sprinklers and the grass and the...
yeah, and it just gets really boring, essentially. But it's sort of a classic among me and my friends because when we were in college in 1991 or something, it came on TV or we had it on VHS, and it was right up our alley at the time. Yeah. I saw Ocean's 8. Did you see that?
Yeah, I watched
What'd you think?
It didn't do it for me. It was, it had all the right elements, but, like, I loved Ocean's 11. I liked Ocean's 12. I was okay with Ocean's 13. This one was a lot more Ocean's 13 than Ocean's 11 for me. Now, I thought some of the actresses were fine. I love their acting in general, but I just thought that it was a little forced, and the plot was simple, and the twists were like, there was this one thing where, in Ocean's 11, when they do the big reveal of what their plan was, you're like, oh, that's what you were doing.
Right.
Well, that makes, oh my God, that's why you're... In this one, it's more like, oh, okay, so the thing you didn't show us, I would have had no way to know about.
Yeah.
And okay, that's nice that you filled us in, but...
The ending with Anne Hathaway seemed a little unrealistic to me as well. I mean, I feel it wasn't super unrealistic, but I feel like better writing could have made that more realistic.
So I didn't not enjoy it. I did enjoy it, and I like a lot of those actresses. I just wasn't... It didn't feel great.
Out of 10?
I would give it a 5.
Yeah, I gave it a 5 too. Okay. Sandra Bullock, Kate Blanchett. Isn't Bullock like balls in English in England?
Bullocks,
like Bullocks. Like I wonder if people make fun of her name.
Yeah,
people in Great Britain, let us know. Anne Hathaway, Mindy Kaling, and others. Directed by Gary Ross, who also directed The Free State of Jones, Hunger Games, Seabiscuit, and Pleasantville.
Oh,
and he wrote Big, by the way.
Oh, by the way, that's one of the things that I thought didn't work as well. So I don't like when movies where it's female protagonists. I think where it doesn't work as well for me is when the way they try to make the female protagonists work or be cool or whatever is they make them a little more male. And so I felt like Sandra Bullock and her partner, Kate
Blanchett.
I just felt like they were sort of playing male roles.
Yeah.
And they were it's kind of hard to describe. like Moana is a movie where the heroine is a woman and she's not like a badass, UFC fighter beating men up, right? No, she's just brave and dedicated to her cause, and she convinces Maui with her thoughts, and but she doesn't overpower Maui with her headlock, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm half with you on this. On one hand, I'm with you in that the characters are portrayed in a masculine style, I would say. But the fact that they had sort of masculine machinations, I wouldn't say I have a fault with. I just felt like the overall thing here is that it was just not very exciting.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like whenever you have, politically speaking, it's like, well, you can't hate on this movie that much because you'll come across like you're one of those men's rights people who are like, how dare you reboot a movie with female characters and you ruin my Ocean's 11 experience. You and I are definitely not in that direction. We abhor those people and their rhetoric. So on one hand, it's just like, I don't want to do that. But at the same time, it was just like, yeah, it was okay. It was like, it would be a fun watch on an airplane.
Right.
Like, just sit back, enjoy yourself. Don't expect anything that interesting. The scenes are all kind of cute and interesting. Like, there's never a point where I'm just like, oh my God, get on with it. It was just mildly entertaining the entire time.
Yeah, that's fair.
And it was great to see those actresses do their thing. I think what maybe would have improved the movie is if they had reduced the number of characters, honestly, and focused on Sandra Bullock and Kate Blanchett, and maybe Anne Hathaway in addition to that. But they tried to include all 8 people a lot, and it just felt like I forgot who was who and why, and you know.
It's a hard thing to do. Somehow, Ocean's 11, they do it masterfully.
Well, right, because from my memory, Brad Pitt and George Clooney's characters really shine through.
Yeah.
You know, you really get a feel for who they are as people.
And they're both quite different in their personalities, but they jive well together. And then Matt Damon is a completely different third. And then you have these bit players that are little entertaining nuggets of their own, right? And then the ensemble works brilliantly. It's very hard to do that. Very hard to do that.
Right. I think another thing is they're trying to make Ocean's 11 with women.
Right.
But Ocean's 11 has been made before.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to make something brand new and interesting when basically it's the fourth movie in a series.
That's right.
And you're doing yet another heist, do you know?
That's right.
All right. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining us out there. Again, apply by sending an essay, 5-page maximum, to contact at Psychology in Seattle, telling us why you think we should give you the $2,000 scholarship for your... Also, you should know that your name will be publicized when you win as a part of the sort of whole deal. You know?
Nice.
The one thing... So if you want to remain anonymous, that's not possible. Like we're going to highlight we're going to get
your name in lights.
Yeah, we're going to get a headshot. We're going to put it on social media.
Can I say their name on the air? In SSV?
Yeah, exactly. That is it for that episode. Thanks for joining us out there. Please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.